Morris Power again. I'm somewhat anxious. I'm near the last day of my oral antibiotic medication. I go back to the doctor tomorrow, but in the meantime I wanted to post an explanation of something I said in my video Fear and Hope on this site. In that video I referenced the work of John Searle on the creation of social reality. I put a link in my description to a summary of his work. You can find some excellent videos on YouTube of his lectures as well. I said that I believe that the social reality that he refers to could be heavily influenced by the most manipulative among us. I have a suspicion as to who those people may be, and I suspect that in fact they may ultimately bring about the ends of civilizations. Let me explain. Many years ago I came across references to a practice among primates that primatologists had noticed. They called it sneaky effing, and essentially it was secret copulation and reproduction by non-alpha males with the females of alpha males. There has been some indication that this practice exists among humans. Now, it's been studied mostly among lower animals where it has the name kleptogamy, but just occasionally references to it surface in various papers. I'm going to put a reference in my description to an article that was published in the Globe and Mail. I think it was about 2012. I'll reference a site that it appears on. It's called Mummy's Little Secret, and it revealed that the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, in doing testing for cystic fibrosis genetic purposes, had uncovered the fact that about 10% of the time the alleged fathers of the children were not in fact the biological fathers. It mentions Dr. Bernard Dickens, a professor at U of T Law, whom I had the honor of studying under, by the way, at one time, was aware of a study in a science experiment, in London, England in the 1970s that showed that 30% of the children in that experiment were not the biological offspring of the man who thought he was their father. Now, I was aware of that experiment. I thought it was in the 1950s, not 70s, in the English Midlands. My recollection is it was close to 55% of the children, all boys in the study, who were not the offspring of the man who thought he was their father. I'm also aware of two other studies, but I can't find any reference to them on the internet anymore. That may be because they've been removed, not necessarily because they were false or wrong, but there is a way apparently to scrub information from all the computers connected to the internet. It's tedious and it takes considerable resources, but it can be done using something called bots. In any case, the information may be out there. I may just not be able to find it. But those two studies, one done in a wealthy suburb or exurb of London, England, and the other in a wealthy neighborhood in a Midwestern U.S. city, which wasn't specified, were both actually deceptive studies. The women involved were maybe misled about the purpose of the studies, but they both showed mispaternity rates, as it's called, of above 33%, as I recall, above 35%. And this suggests that this practice is widespread, and it suggested to me that the kleptogamy observed among lower animals is in fact widespread. I thought this might explain something that I read many years ago. An English author called John Glubb, actually a retired British general who wrote many excellent articles, but one in particular caught my attention on the fates of imperial peoples. I'll try to put a reference to that in the description as well. And Glubb observed that there appeared to be a 250-year, 10-generational cycle to the rise and fall of each civilization. And if he's right, it struck me that first of all, that the reasons he advanced of various loss of values were nonsense. In fact, in every civilization, towards its end, there have been people calling for a return to earlier values and decrying the degeneracy, etc., that they saw. And most of the behavior that they've noted is something that could be attributed to something called a narcissistic personality. They appear to become very widespread at the end of civilizations. And I thought, if these kleptogamists, let's call them, exist among humans, call them serial sexual predators, people who seduce, men who seduce one woman after another and leave her pregnant, then in fact that could explain the proliferation of narcissistic personalities near the end of a civilization. It's actually genetic. Now I should mention that Dr. James Fallon of the University of California at Los Angeles has been studying the worst kind of narcissist, the psychopath, from a nearby prison. A number of them he's MRI scanned, and he discovered that it may be partly genetic. It's not just environmental, and in fact he found that his own brain scan reflected many of the characteristics, but because he had a superb upbringing, he is in fact a respected medical researcher rather than a prison inmate. There's also an interesting Kobo ebook called Ellen Who? The Story of a Secret Love Child. It's by Ellen O'Neill. You can download it from the Kobo website, buy it and download it, as I did. Putting all this together, I'm beginning to think that, in fact, this practice spreads narcissistic personality types through a society, and 10 generations sounds about right for how long it would take before it got really severe. If this is true, then the final end of the society, the civilization, may be all but inevitable. Although not necessarily. Remember Dr. Fallon and how he had some of the characteristics, brain characteristics, but was able to overcome them. Also, in his paper, Glubb dismissed the possibility of a fallen civilization, a fallen imperial people, ever rising again, but I think that's wrong on the face of it. If you look at the Western Roman Empire, after it fell, the peoples of Europe did descend into a very low state, medieval feudalism. But then 1,000 years later, there was a renaissance in Europe, and many of those same peoples created new knowledge, new civilizations, etc. So I think after a time it may, in effect, wear off. My thought is that to create a predatory genetic type like that must be a lot of investment for the evolutionary process, and if it's not rewarded, as it wouldn't be if they were crushed down to medieval serf level for 1,000 years, then eventually the genetic pattern that underlies it may begin to dissipate. That's just a thought. It worried me how they would conceal this until I discovered in the late 90s that the police forces of the world had become alerted to a vast pedophile networking scheme. Those too are a type of sexual predator. And it was thought that they were isolated, but now police know they are formed vast networks. One recently was uncovered worldwide that they thought might be as many as 70,000 people. And that would explain it. If this kleptogamy practice is very widespread, much more than pedophilia, then they may have vast worldwide networks to suppress any awareness of it. In any case, this is something that others will have to explore. I won't have the time even if I survive now, and I certainly don't have the resources, but it could make saving the present civilization much more difficult. And yes, it occurred to me that Several psychiatrists have said that the American White House now houses a raging, malignant narcissist, and that may not be coincidental. I wonder how many of those who helped to put him there have a similar personality type. Anyway, you can look up narcissistic personality characteristics online. They're very rigid. They condemn everyone but themselves. They're very cunning and manipulative, etc. So I hope this will serve as a cue that there may be an underlying, even genetic process that's going to make saving civilization very difficult at present, but there may be hope, even if it can't be saved. I certainly hope so. I'm going to end this video here. I may post a subsequent one on how I see a more distant hope. Thank you, as always, for viewing this video.